Cole Maddox put his gun to the table before he sat down. Not as a threat, as a habit. The same way a man sets down something heavy he's been carrying too long and isn't sure yet whether to pick back up. The woman standing at his stove didn't flinch. She didn't turn around. She just said quietly, without looking at him, "Supper's almost ready. You can shoot me after you eat, but I'd rather you didn't. I fixed the back fence while I was at it." If this story already has your heart moving, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go. The gun was still on the table when Ruth Calloway set the bowl down in front of it. She'd seen guns before. She'd held one herself the night 3 men came to the edge of her property line 2 years back and decided that a widow living alone meant an invitation. She'd stood on the porch in the dark with James's old Winchester, and she hadn't said a single word, and they'd left. So a gun on a stranger's table didn't do anything to her breathing that she hadn't already taught her breathing not to do. What she noticed instead was the kitchen itself. 4 years of neglect had a particular smell. She recognized it because her own kitchen had smelled that way for 3 months after James died, before she'd made the decision to either live in it or leave it. And she'd chosen to live. This kitchen had been chosen differently. Whoever lived here had chosen to keep existing inside the decay without fixing it, which was a specific kind of grief she understood the shape of, even if she didn't know the story. The dishes had been sitting in the dry sink long enough that the pattern on the plates was invisible under the film. The floor had a month of mud on it, maybe more, tracked in and left because there was nobody to track it in for. The blanket on the chair by the dead fireplace had been dropped there and stepped around daily. She could tell by the path worn and the grit near it. Never picked up, never moved. Just present. Just endured. She had lit the fire first. Then she'd started the stew. She hadn't planned to be here. She'd been 3 miles east on the wagon road to Clearwater when the back wheel had cracked clean through on a rock she hadn't seen in the dusk. The horse had pulled up lame not a 1/4 mile later, and she'd walked the rest, with her travel bag over one shoulder and the full understanding that she was going to have to ask for help, which she disliked, but she'd made peace with disliking it. The feed store man in Driftwood Creek had told her about this place 2 weeks ago when she'd been asking about ranchers who might need seasonal labor. Said there was a man named Cole Maddox, about 4 miles east, who'd bought up the Hennessy spread after old Bill Hennessy passed. Said the place had been decent land before and was becoming something else under the current ownership, which meant it was being let go. Said the man was quiet, kept to himself. Nobody knew much about him except that he'd come from somewhere back east and paid cash for the property, which in this part of Oklahoma Territory in 1887 meant either he'd earned a great deal of money in a profession he wasn't advertising, or he'd taken it from somewhere he wasn't discussing. Ruth had filed that information away the way she filed most information, quietly, without comment, available when needed. She had knocked on the door first. Nobody had answered. The back window hadn't latched properly. She'd noticed it from the outside. The kind of gap that forms when a frame settles, and nobody tends to it. And she'd thought about that for a moment, about the nature of entering a stranger's property uninvited. And then she'd thought about the lame horse and the cracked wheel and the 4 miles back to town in the dark. And she'd made a practical decision. She would cook. She would clean what was immediate. If the man came home and threw her out, she'd go. If he came home and shot her, well, she'd taken that chance before and hadn't been shot yet. And she didn't reckon tonight was the night. That had been 2 hours ago. She heard the horse in the yard before she heard the door, heard the particular gait of a rider who'd been out a full day and was coming in without urgency, which meant whatever he'd been doing, he'd finished it or given up on it. And either way, He wasn't arriving fast and angry. That was useful to know. She heard him stop outside the door. She heard him stop for a long time. Then the door opened. She kept her back to it, kept her hands on the stovework, and her breathing even. She heard him come in, heard the sound of something heavy set down on the table. That was the gun, she'd learned that later. And she heard him go very still, in the way that people go still when they're deciding between several options rapidly. "I'm not here to rob you," she said. "Supper's almost ready. I'd appreciate it if you'd hear me out before you make any decisions about my continued presence." The silence behind her was very specific. It was the silence of a man who had arrived home expecting nothing and found something and was reassessing. "Turn around," he said. His voice was low and even, and had the particular quality of a man who had trained himself not to put anything in it that he didn't intend to put there. She recognized that quality. She'd developed it herself. She turned around. Cole Maddox was taller than she'd expected, which was saying something, because she'd expected tall. He had the kind of build that spoke of outdoor work done consistently over years, not the squared-off bulk of someone who'd trained for it, but the lean, functional kind that comes from doing the actual thing daily. Dark hair with silver at the temples, a scar below his left jaw that was old enough to be part of his face rather than an addition to it. Eyes that were doing something she recognized immediately. They were cataloging. Taking in information with a speed and method that was trained, not casual. He was reading the room the way a man reads a room when reading rooms has been his profession. That was interesting. "My name is Ruth Calloway," she said. "I have a ranch 4 miles west on the Clearwater Road. My back wheel cracked, and my horse pulled up lame about a mile back. It was dark, and I didn't want to walk to town, so I came here. Your window doesn't latch." She held his gaze. "You should fix that. Anyone could walk in." "Anyone did walk in," he said. "Yes, and she made you a venison stew with the dried herbs on your shelf, which needed using before they went to nothing, and swept your floor, which needed it considerably more than the herbs did." She turned back to the stove, because the stew needed a final stir, and because she'd said what needed saying. "Sit down, Mr. Maddox. Eat first. Then I'll explain whatever else you want explained." "I don't recall inviting you to know my name," he said. "Feed store man in town told me about this place," she said. "I'd been asking about ranchers who might need seasonal labor. Your name came up. I hadn't planned to arrive this way, but here I am." She heard the chair pull out. She heard him sit. "You fixed the back fence," he said. It wasn't a question. He must have seen it on the way in. "The east section was down about 40 yards. I had wire in my travel bag. I carry wire because I'm a practical woman who has learned that fences fall at inconvenient times." She set the bowl in front of him. "I didn't touch anything I didn't need to touch. I didn't go through your things. I cooked from what was in your pantry, which needed using. And I swept, because I could not, in good conscience, eat a meal in a room that dirty. And I was going to eat this meal, whether you objected or not, because I haven't eaten since morning." She sat down across from him with her own bowl, and she began to eat. He watched her for a moment. Then he looked at the stew. Then he picked up the spoon. The sound he made when he took the first mouthful wasn't a sound he'd intended to make, she could tell. It was involuntary. The specific, unguarded sound of someone who has been eating badly for a very long time, and has just been reminded, without warning, of what food is supposed to be. He didn't say anything. He kept eating. She ate her own portion and let the silence be what it was. After a while, he said, "How long have you been out here, on your own?" 4 years, she said. "Since?" "Since my husband died." She said it the way she always said it now, straight, no hesitation, Not in Colorado, mining accident. I came back to the ranch and I stayed. Why? Because it was mine, she said. Because James built it, and I helped him build it, and there was nobody else to keep it, and I wasn't going to let it go to someone who hadn't earned it. She looked at him steadily. Why did you come out here, Mr. Maddox? You're not a rancher by background. The way you came through that door, the way you read this room, that's not a man who grew up working land. Something shifted in his face. Very small, very controlled. That's a direct question for someone eating a man's food without being invited, he said. I broke into your kitchen and cooked your supper, she said. I think we're past certain formalities. He looked at her for a moment. Then something almost like a recognition moved through his expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the acknowledgement of a particular kind of person. The kind who says the real thing instead of the convenient thing. Pinkerton, he said. I worked for them for 14 years out of the Chicago office. She absorbed that. And now you're here. And now I'm here. She didn't push it. She'd learned the difference between a story someone was ready to tell and a story someone was still deciding whether to survive. And she could read which one she was looking at. I'll be out of your way first light, she said. I'll need to see to my horse and my wheel. I can pay for the use of your barn and the meal, not in cash right now, but in labor. I can have your east fence properly reinforced inside of 2 days. The kind of reinforcement that lasts, not just the patch I put on tonight. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. You offering to work for me? He said. I'm offering a fair trade, she said. There's a difference. He set down the cup. He looked around the kitchen, at the floor she'd swept, at the dishes she'd washed and stacked, at the fire burning in a fireplace that apparently hadn't held a fire in a considerable time, based on the state of the ash she'd cleared. 2 days, he said. 2 days, she said. Barn for sleeping, meals in exchange for labor. After 2 days, I'll have someone from town come out for the wheel, and we'll call it settled. He was quiet for a moment. You do this often, he said. Walk into strangers' situations and reorganize them? Only when the situation requires it, she said. And then, because it was true, and he would find out anyway, your water trough on the north side has a crack running 4 inches along the base. It'll hold through autumn, but it won't hold through a freeze. Your chicken coop has a gap in the back wall. Something's been getting in at night. That's why they're not laying. Your south pasture hasn't been properly rotated, and the grass is going to need management before spring, or you'll lose it. She paused. I noticed these things while I was fixing the fence. I noticed things. Cole Maddox put down his spoon very slowly and looked at her with an expression she would later recognize as the one he wore when he was genuinely surprised, which was rare enough to be notable. You walked that whole fence line? He said. I had time while the stew was setting, she said simply. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Sleep in the barn. I'll show you where the tools are kept in the morning. Ruth Calloway nodded. She finished her meal. She cleared both bowls without being asked. She banked the fire to last through the night, and she went to the barn and she lay in the dark on the clean straw she'd rearranged into a proper bedding shape, and she listened to the Oklahoma night settle around her, and she thought, not for the first time in 4 years, that she was going to be all right. She did not know yet about Harlan Voss. She did not know that 2 days ago, a man she had last seen in a Denver courtroom 3 years earlier had ridden into Driftwood Creek with 3 lawyers and a leather satchel full of documents. She did not know that Walter Bone, who ran the Cherokee settlement and the tool repair shop on the south end of town, had received a notice that morning claiming his land deed carried an irregularity under a territorial tax provision enacted in 1882, a provision so obscure that the notice itself was 4 pages of dense legal language, designed not to be understood on first reading. She did not know that the feed store man who had told her about Cole Maddox's ranch had been asked that very afternoon by a well-dressed stranger whether there were any properties in the area with reliable water access and limited legal protection. She did not know that Senator Harlan Voss had a system, and that the system worked by finding people who were already isolated and tired, people who had been managing alone for so long that the idea of one more fight felt like the thing that would finally break them, and offering them a way out that felt like dignity, but was designed as surrender. What she knew was the sound of a horse settling in the next stall, the smell of proper hay and good wood, and the quiet fact that for the first time in a considerable number of months, she had eaten a meal she hadn't made alone. She was up before dawn. That was habit, not anxiety. The body learns what it must, and Ruth Calloway's body had learned years ago that the hour before daylight belonged to whoever was willing to use it. She was at the water pump before the sky had decided on its color, and she'd checked the lame horse's foreleg. Swelling was down, which was good, which meant 2 days' rest, and the animal would be sound. And she was in the middle of a systematic inspection of the coop's back wall when she heard boots on the hard ground behind her. She didn't startle. She looked up. Cole Maddox was standing 10 feet away with 2 cups of coffee. He was watching her with the particular expression of a man who has been watching for a few minutes before announcing himself, not from any suspicious intent, but from the habit of observing before engaging that she was beginning to recognize as simply how he moved through the world. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," she said. "The gap in the back wall is about here." She indicated with her hand. "Something came through 2 nights running minimum, based on the scratching on the wood and the feather pattern on the floor. Weasel, most likely. I can have it closed in an hour if you have 1/2-inch board and square nails." He handed her a cup. "3rd shelf in the barn. Boards against the back wall, left side." She took the cup. The coffee was strong and very good, and she did not expect that. She drank it and looked at him. "You made coffee," she said. "I do know how to make coffee," he said. "I didn't say you didn't," she said. "I said you made it. It's good." Something moved in his face again. That small, controlled shift she was already learning to read. This one was different from the surprise of the night before. This one was something older and more complicated, the expression of a person who has been doing something without being noticed for a very long time, and has just been noticed, and is not yet sure how to carry that. He looked past her at the coop. "Show me what you're looking at," he said. She showed him. They worked side by side through the first part of the morning, and the silence between them was functional, the kind of silence that happens when 2 people are doing physical work and have agreed without speaking to put conversation where it belongs, which is in the spaces between tasks, and not forced into the tasks themselves. It was Ruth who broke it. She was driving the last board into place on the coop when she said, without looking up, "The man in town. The one who came in 2 days ago with the lawyers." Cole went still. She noticed it immediately. His hands didn't stop working, but the quality of his attention changed. That cataloging focus sharpening into something else, something more alert. "Harlan Voss," she said. She drove the nail home. "You heard the name." She looked at him then. "Your face just did a thing it hasn't done yet since I met you." His jaw was set. His eyes were steady and entirely unreadable, which was itself a kind of answer. "I know that name," he said. His voice was flat. The particular flatness of a man who has made a decision about how he's going to say something and is holding the line on it. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "So do I," she said quietly. The morning air was thin and cold and completely still between them. "Denver," she said. 3 years ago. He went by a different name in Denver, or Marsh. He had a land company, very respectable, very well dressed. He had a lawyer named Cavett, who filed a tax claim against a homestead family named Prescott. Mother, 2 daughters, had the land for 9 years. The claim said the property had been used as collateral on a debt the husband had signed before he died. Debt that nobody had ever heard of, that somehow existed in a county ledger that had been amended. She paused. She looked at her hands. "I was working as a records clerk for the Territorial Land Office at the time," she said. "I found the amendment. I found the original filing. I found the discrepancy in the notary dates. I brought it to my supervisor." A long breath. "My supervisor had received a very generous personal gift from Mr. Marsh's land company the previous month. The Prescott family vacated inside of 2 weeks. I resigned the week after." Cole looked at her for a very long time. "He's using a different name now," he said. "He always does," she said. "But the method is the same. The documents look legitimate until you know exactly what to look for." She met his gaze. "And I know exactly what to look for." The moment sat between them with the weight of a thing that has just changed shape without either person asking it to. Cole stood. He picked up the tools and he started walking toward the barn, and he said, without turning around, "Come inside. I need to tell you something about why I left Pinkerton." She followed him. And somewhere 4 miles east, in Driftwood Creek, in the best room of the only hotel worth calling a hotel, Senator Harlan Voss was sitting at a table with his morning coffee and his leather satchel, and his patient, practiced composure. And he was making a list of his own, a list of properties with water access and limited legal protection, and owners who had been alone long enough to be tired. And the name Walter Bone was at the top of it, and the name Ruth Calloway was second, and the name Cole Maddox had been added just that morning by a man he paid to notice things, because a man who used to work for Pinkerton, living 4 miles from a woman who used to work for the Territorial Land Office, was the kind of coincidence that Harlan Voss had not survived this long by ignoring. He picked up his pen. He began to write. Outside the hotel window, Driftwood Creek went about its morning. The feed store opened. The smithy fired up. Deputy Nora Sheehan walked her early circuit of the main street, with her badge polished and her hat level, and the particular expression of a woman who has learned to look like she's seeing less than she is. She saw the man come out of the hotel with the leather satchel. She watched him cross to the land office. She watched the land office clerk hold the door open for him before he even knocked. She walked to the end of the block, turned the corner, and stood very still for a moment, with her hand on the wall and her mind working through what she'd just seen, with the rapid, practical focus of someone who has been waiting for a particular kind of trouble to arrive and has just identified its shape. Then she turned and walked back the way she'd come, because there was work to do and not much time to start it. 4 miles east, Ruth Calloway sat at Cole Maddox's kitchen table and listened to a man explain the worst thing he'd ever done, and she did not look away from him once. And when he finished, she said, "That's why you came out here." "Yes," he said. "And you've been deciding ever since whether you deserve to stop running," she said. He looked at the table. "Something like that," he said. She looked at the window, at the flat Oklahoma morning outside it, the sky pale and enormous, and entirely indifferent to whatever was decided in this kitchen. She thought about James. She thought about the Prescott family and the house they'd left with whatever they could carry. She thought about Walter Bone, who had come to her fence line last spring to help her pull a post she couldn't manage alone, and had never once made her feel the size of the favor. She thought about Harlan Voss's careful, patient face. "Well," she said. She put her hands flat on the table, and she looked at Cole Maddox directly. The full, unguarded version of the look she saved for moments when there was no point in anything, except the exact truth. I think you might be about to find out. Cole Maddox had not told anyone what happened in Kansas City. Not the full shape of it. Not the version that kept him awake in the specific hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the mind refuses to do anything except return to the thing it least wants to carry. He told Ruth Calloway because she had just told him something true about herself, something that cost her, and he understood without being told that she was a woman who operated on reciprocity. You gave her the real thing, or you gave her nothing. And nothing was not going to work in this kitchen this morning, with Harlan Voss 4 miles away writing lists. There was a man named Decker, he said. James Decker. He ran a labor organizing operation out of the stockyards in Kansas City. The meatpacking companies hired Pinkerton to dismantle it. He looked at his hands. My job was to get inside the organization, gather names, gather evidence of any criminal activity they could use to prosecute and discredit. A pause. There wasn't any criminal activity. Decker was a straight man running a legitimate operation. Peaceful, careful. He had a wife and 2 daughters, and he believed genuinely that what he was doing was going to make things better for the men he represented. Ruth said nothing. She watched him. I was inside for 8 months, Cole said. Decker trusted me, completely, because I gave him every reason to. His voice stayed flat, stayed even. When I gave Pinkerton the report, I included his name, his home address, his organizational records. He stopped. They used it to arrest him on manufactured charges. Conspiracy to incite. He spent 11 months in a county jail before the case was dropped for lack of evidence. By then, his organization was gone. His men had been blacklisted from every stockyard in Missouri, and his wife had taken the girls back to Ohio. He looked up. He died in that jail, not from the charges, from pneumonia. Second winter in. A long breath. He trusted me, and I used that trust to destroy everything he built, for men who were paying me to do exactly that. The kitchen was very quiet. Did you know what they were going to do with it? Ruth said. When you gave them the report? He looked at her. I knew enough, he said. She sat with that for a moment. She sat with it the way she sat with most difficult things. Not moving, not softening it, just letting it be exactly as heavy as it was. And you resigned, she said. The day after he died, he said. I heard about the pneumonia from the Chicago office like it was a footnote. Administrative notation. Subject deceased. Case closed. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the table. I handed in my credentials, walked out of the office, and I didn't stop walking in any meaningful sense until I ended up here. 4 years ago, she said. 3.5. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You came out here to stop. Yes. And has it worked? He looked at her. There was something in the question that was direct without being unkind. The way a good doctor asks about pain. Not to make you feel it more, but because knowing the exact location matters. Some days, he said. Ruth nodded once. She stood up. She picked up both cups, poured the remaining coffee into the basin, and set the cups down. She stood at the counter with her back to him for a moment, not because she was avoiding the conversation, but because she was thinking, and she thought better when she was doing something with her hands, even if it was only holding the edge of a counter. Harlan Voss, she said. In Denver, he forged a notary certification on the debt instrument. The original filing was from one county. The notary seal was from another. I don't know if he uses the same method each time or if he adapts it, but the core is always a document that looks legitimate until you know what a legitimate document actually looks like. And you know what it looks like, Cole said. I spent 3 years in the Territorial Land Office, she said. I processed more deed filings and debt instruments than I can count. I know what the seals look like, what the county stamps look like, what the recording dates are supposed to correspond to. She turned around. If Voss is filing against Walter Bone, I want to see the document. Walter will show it to you, Cole said, if you ask him directly. He's not a man who asks for help, but he's not a man who refuses it when it comes to him with a clear purpose. You know him well, she said. He helped me re-roof the barn the first autumn I was here, Cole said. Showed up one morning, looked at the state of it, and started pulling shingles without asking whether I wanted the help. He said, "A man doesn't need to be asked to do what's obvious." A pause. I've tried to live by that since. Ruth looked at him steadily. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter and more considered. We should ride to town, she said. Today. Now. Before Voss has more time to move the process forward. My horse is ready, he said. He was already standing. They rode the 4 miles to Driftwood Creek in the thin morning light, with the kind of silence between them that had changed overnight from the silence of 2 strangers being careful around each other, into something else, something that had a little more room in it. Ruth rode with her back straight and her eyes on the road ahead, and Cole rode with the peripheral awareness of a man who has spent 14 years being paid to notice what other people missed. And what he noticed this morning was that Ruth Calloway rode like someone who had spent years going places alone, and had made a particular peace with that, and was not entirely sure yet what to do with the fact that this morning she wasn't. He didn't say any of that. He watched the road. Walter Bone's repair shop was the last building on the south end of town before the road opened up into the flat scrubland that ran toward the Cherokee settlement. It was a solid, well-kept structure, with tools hanging in organized rows along the outside wall, and a hand-painted sign above the door that said, Bones. Tools, wheels, anything metal. In letters that were precise and unhurried. Walter himself was at the workbench inside, his back to the door, his hands moving through the repair of a wagon axle, with the focused calm of a man who has found the specific corner of the world where his particular skills are exactly what is needed. He turned when he heard them come in. He looked at Cole first, then at Ruth, and his expression was the particular expression of a man who does not require explanation to understand a situation, but will wait politely for one to be offered. Walter, Cole said. This is Ruth Calloway. She ranches out on the Clearwater Road. I know who she is, Walter said. She helped Emma Greer with her harvest 2 seasons back, when Emma's hand was broke. He looked at Ruth with a direct, level attention. You came about the notice. I came about the notice, Ruth said. Walter set down the axle tool. He reached under the counter and produced a folded document and set it on the workbench without drama, the way a man puts down something he has already thoroughly examined and found everything wrong with. Ruth unfolded it. She read it. She read it a second time, more slowly, and Cole watched her face the way she had watched his face that morning, looking not at the surface of it, but at what was happening underneath. She found it on the 3rd paragraph. He could tell by the way her hands went very still on the paper. Walter, she said, this notice references the territorial tax provision of 1882, subsection 4, which classifies land as underutilized if it fails to meet a productivity threshold assessed by the county land commissioner. She looked up. Who is the current county land commissioner? Walter's jaw was tight. Appointed 6 months ago, he said. Name of Sutton. Came with 2 letters of recommendation from a land development company based in St. Louis. Ruth looked at Cole. Cole looked at the document in her hands. It's not the notary seal this time, she said quietly. It's the productivity assessment. The threshold in subsection 4 is written as a numerical measure of annual yield per acre. But the number in this notice, she held the document toward the light from the door, is not the number in the actual statute. The actual statute says 40 bushels equivalent per acre. This notice says 14. Her voice was completely steady. Someone changed the threshold, not in the original law, in a county interpretation memo that would have been filed through the land commissioner's office. Walter looked at her for a long moment. "Can that be proven?" he said. "If the original statute is on record in the territorial court," she said, "and the county interpretation memo is on record with the land commissioner, and those two numbers don't match, yes." She folded the document with the precise care of someone who understands that a piece of paper is now evidence. "It can absolutely be proven." "The Territorial Court Records Office," Cole said. He was already thinking through it. "That's in Guthrie." 2 days' ride, Ruth said. 1.5 if we move, Cole said. He looked at Walter. "Who else has received a notice?" Walter was quiet for a moment. He had the stillness of a man who has learned when to measure his words and when to set measurement aside. "May Greer got one yesterday," he said. "Her place backs up to the South Creek. Tom Whitfield on the East Road got one this morning. I heard it from his boy when he came in for a wheel pin an hour ago." He paused. "There will be more. He started with the ones closest to the water." Cole looked at Ruth. She was already working through something in her mind. He could see it. That rapid internal calculation she did when the shape of a problem was becoming clear enough to begin solving. "He's moving fast," she said. "Faster than Denver. In Denver, he gave the families 2 weeks before he applied for the court hearing. Here, he's filing multiple notices simultaneously." She looked at Cole. "He's learned. He found that simultaneous pressure prevents people from coordinating. If everyone is managing their own crisis, nobody is looking at the pattern." "Except you," Cole said. "Except me," she said. And then, quietly, "And you." The repair shop was very still for a moment. Outside, Driftwood Creek moved through its ordinary morning. A wagon passed on the main road. The smithy rang with its steady work. Somewhere down the block, someone was having a conversation that was too far away to hear clearly, and not far enough away to entirely disappear. Walter looked at both of them. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need to know if you're willing to fight this," Ruth said. "Publicly. In court if it comes to that. Because what I'm describing is not a quiet process. If we establish the pattern, if we can show that the productivity threshold was deliberately falsified in the county interpretation memo, that implicates Sutton at minimum and Voss by connection. He will not absorb that quietly." "I have been on this land for 19 years, Walter said. His voice was even and entirely without performance. "My father's family was on this land before the territory was a territory. I built the shop with wood I cut from my own property. I have not asked this county for a single thing except to be left alone to work." He looked at her steadily. "Tell me what you need." "Your notice," she said, "and May Greer's and Tom Whitfield's if they'll give them, and anyone else who has received one." She paused. "And I need to know whether Deputy Sheehan is someone who can be trusted." Something moved in Walter's face. Not quite a smile. The specific expression of a man who has watched a situation carefully enough from the outside to know something others are still discovering. "Nora Sheehan has been watching Sutton since the week he was appointed," Walter said. "She came to me 2 months ago and asked me to let her know if anything unusual came through the land commissioner's office in relation to the settlement properties." He looked at Cole. "She knew something was coming before the rest of us did." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Where is she now?" "Her morning circuit ends at the south end of town," Walter said. "She passes this door in about 10 minutes." Ruth set the folded notice on the workbench. She put her hand flat on it. Then we wait 10 minutes, she said. Nora Sheehan came through the door at precisely the time Walter said she would, which told Cole something about the regularity and purpose of her routine. She was younger than he'd expected. Late 20s probably, with the particular quality of someone who has spent years in a professional environment that didn't expect her to succeed, and has developed a specific, contained confidence as a result. Not aggressive, not performing. Just settled in herself, in a way that took up exactly as much space as was needed, and not 1 inch more. She looked at Cole first, then at Ruth, then at Walter. "I figured it would be today," she said. She took off her hat. "I saw him go into the land commissioner's office this morning." She looked at Ruth directly. "You're Ruth Calloway. You used to work for the Territorial Land Office in Denver." "I did," Ruth said. "I sent a letter to the Denver office 3 months ago asking about any prior land fraud cases with the same document signature pattern," Nora said. "They wrote back that all records from that period were unavailable for review." A pause. "Which is a specific answer that told me something specific. That someone had already moved to restrict access to them," Ruth said. "Yes," Nora said. She sat down on the stool beside the workbench with the ease of someone who had sat on that stool before, which meant she and Walter had been having conversations in this room for a while. "What did you find in the notice?" Ruth told her about the productivity threshold. She told her about the 14 versus 40 discrepancy. She told her about the county interpretation memo and what it would mean if that memo carried Sutton's official seal on a falsified number. Nora listened without interrupting. She had the listening quality of someone who is not waiting for a pause to insert their own information, but is genuinely absorbing what is being given to them. When Ruth finished, Nora said, "Sutton filed a records request with the Territorial Court in Guthrie last week. I don't know what he requested, because the filing was through a private attorney, not through his official office, which is irregular." She looked at Cole. "I think he was checking whether the original statute was still on record, meaning he may already know the discrepancy is visible," Cole said. "Meaning if we're going to Guthrie," Nora said, "we should go before he files anything that complicates the records access." Ruth stood. "Tomorrow, at first light," she said. She looked at Cole. "You and I." He nodded. "I'll stay here," Nora said. "I'll talk to May Greer and Tom Whitfield today. Get the notices. Start building the record of who received what and when." She looked at Walter. "And I'll be making my routine rounds past the hotel every 2 hours." Walter picked up the axle tool. He turned back to the workbench. Over his shoulder he said, "He came in here yesterday afternoon. Boss. Very polite. Very well dressed. Said he admired what I'd built, and that he wanted me to know the notice was strictly a procedural matter, and that he was confident we could resolve it amicably." He drove a pin into the axle housing with a single, clean stroke. He picked up one of my tools off the wall while he was talking, turned it over in his hands, set it down again. A pause. I noticed he put it back in the wrong place. The room was quiet. "That's deliberate," Ruth said. "He does that. Handles things. Moves them slightly. It's meant to communicate that he's comfortable in your space, in a way you're not comfortable with him being." She picked up her hat from the counter where she'd set it. "It means he's already decided the outcome." Cole looked at her. "Then we'd better decide it first," he said. She put her hat on. She looked at Walter, at the steady certainty of a man who had 19 years of mornings in this room behind him, and intended to have 19 more. "We'll be back from Guthrie in 3 days," she said. "Keep the notice safe." "It'll be here," Walter said. He didn't look up from the axle. "So will I." They walked out into the Driftwood Creek morning, and Ruth did not look back at the hotel as they passed it. But Cole did, and in the window of the corner room on the second floor, he saw a man standing with a coffee cup and a view of the entire Main Street. And the man was watching them walk, and on his face was the patient, practiced composure of someone who has not yet encountered an obstacle he couldn't find a way around. Cole looked away. He kept walking. He thought about James Decker. He thought about the way trust, once given and destroyed, leaves a specific kind of scar in a man. The kind that doesn't disappear, but that can, with the right pressure and the right purpose, become load-bearing. He thought about what Ruth had said that morning in his kitchen, about deciding whether he deserved to stop running. He didn't have an answer to that yet, but he was beginning to think that the answer might not be the point. The point might be the decision about what to do while you were still figuring it out. He caught up with Ruth at the horses. She was already untying her reins with the focused efficiency that he was starting to understand was simply how she operated. Not cold, not rushed, just entirely clear about what came next. "You all right?" he said. She looked at him, a straight, direct, unguarded look that she seemed to reserve for moments when the question deserved a real answer. "I've been waiting 3 years to be in a position to do something about that man," she said. "I am considerably better than all right." She mounted. He mounted. They rode back toward the ranch with the full weight of what was coming moving ahead of them on the road, like weather you can see building on the horizon before it arrives. And Ruth Calloway rode into it the way she rode into everything. Straight-backed, eyes forward, already thinking 3 steps ahead. And Cole Maddox rode beside her, and felt something he had not felt in 3.5 years of deliberate stillness begin to come back to life in him, like circulation returning to a limb you'd forgotten was still attached. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. But it was real. They left before the sky had any color in it. Ruth had her travel bag packed and her horse checked and ready before Cole came out of the house, which he'd half expected by now, and he didn't comment on it. He'd made biscuits and wrapped them in cloth, and he handed her 2 without ceremony as he mounted, and she took them without ceremony and put one in her coat pocket and ate the other as they rode. And that was the entirety of their morning conversation for the first mile, which suited both of them fine. The road to Guthrie ran southeast through flat scrubland that opened up after the first 10 miles into something wider and more particular, the kind of Oklahoma Territory landscape that looked empty until you'd been in it long enough to understand that it was full of exactly what it was supposed to be full of. Ruth had ridden this road twice before, once going, once coming back, both times alone, both times with a purpose that hadn't worked out the way she'd intended. She didn't say this to Cole. She rode and watched the land and let the morning settle into its proper shape around them. It was Cole who spoke first, about an hour out. "Tell me about the land office," he said. "In Denver. How you got there?" She glanced at him. He was watching the road ahead, not watching her, which she'd noticed was how he asked questions. Looking away, giving you the space to answer or not, without the pressure of being directly observed. It was a good technique. She recognized it as trained, but didn't hold that against it. "I went to Denver with James 2 years after we married," she said. "He'd been offered work in the assay office, good, steady work, and we thought we'd stay a year and save enough to buy land outright." A pause. The year turned into 3. James moved into the mining survey division. I started at the land office as a filing clerk because we needed the second income, and because I could read and write clearly and add columns without errors, which turned out to be less common than you'd hope. She adjusted her reins. I was good at it. I was good at noticing when something didn't match. Numbers, dates, county stamps. I had a supervisor named Mr. Alderman who said I had an instinct for document integrity, which meant I was irritating to the people who were counting on nobody checking their work too carefully. "And then Voss," Cole said. "And then Voss," she said. "He came into the territory as Theodore Marsh. Land Development Company. Very legitimate on the surface. The Prescott claim came through our office as a routine debt recovery filing. I processed it on a Tuesday afternoon, and I almost didn't catch it because it was designed to almost not be caught." She was quiet for a moment. The notary seal was from the right county. The recording date matched the debt instrument date. Everything was in order except one thing. The original water rights agreement that the debt was supposedly secured against had been filed 7 years earlier in a different county, and a modification to a cross-county filing requires the modification to be notarized in the originating county, not the current one. She looked ahead at the road. "It's the kind of detail you only know if you've processed enough cross-county filings to have seen the rule applied. Most people haven't. Most clerks process within their own county, and that's the extent of it." "So Voss counted on that," Cole said. "He counted on it every time," she said. "And he was right every time. Until me." A pause. "And even with me it didn't matter, because Alderman buried the discrepancy, and the Prescott family lost their land anyway." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you," he said, "that you found it and it didn't help them?" It was a direct question, the kind that didn't have a comfortable answer. "Every day," she said, simply, without dressing it. Esther Prescott was 43 years old, and she'd built that place with her bare hands after her husband died. She had a daughter with a bad leg who needed stable ground to walk on. She had apple trees she'd planted from seed. Ruth's voice stayed even. "I found the discrepancy, and I handed it to the one person who could have stopped it. And he chose not to. And I watched her load a wagon with what fit, and drive away from 9 years of her life." A breath. "So yes, it bothers me." Cole said nothing. He rode beside her and let the answer be exactly as heavy as she'd given it. They made good time through the morning. The road was dry and the horses were sound, and they pushed the pace without discussing it, both of them understanding, without saying so, that every hour between now and when they reached the Guthrie Records office was an hour Voss could use to file something that would complicate their access. It was mid-morning when Cole said, "He'll know we left." "He already knows," Ruth said. "He had someone watching your property. I noticed the rider on the ridge above the east fence line when we came out this morning." Cole looked at her. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't want to change how we rode out," she said. "If we'd looked like we'd noticed, he'd have sent someone ahead to cut us off or warn Guthrie. This way he thinks we don't know he's watching, which means he'll wait to see where we go before he reacts." She glanced at Cole. "How long before he figures out we're headed to the territorial court?" "Depends on who he has in Guthrie," Cole said. "He has someone in every town," Ruth said. It wasn't speculation. It was the voice of someone who had spent 3 years studying the operational patterns of a particular kind of predator. "The question is whether that someone has the standing to access the records office ahead of us." "Sutton filed a records request last week," Cole said. "Nora said it was through a private attorney, not official channels." "Which means he was probing," Ruth said, "checking whether the original statute was still accessible. If the attorney came back and said, yes, it's on record, Voss would know the discrepancy was visible." She thought for a moment. If the attorney came back and said the record was restricted or unavailable, Voss would know he had time. She looked at Cole. "We need to know which answer that attorney brought back." Cole thought about it. "There's a man in Guthrie," he said, "name of Haskell. He ran investigations for the Federal Land Office before he retired. He and I crossed paths on a case in '82, before Kansas City. He's straight, and he knows how the records office works from the inside. He paused. I haven't spoken to him in 5 years. But he knows you, Ruth said. He knows who I was, Cole said. The distinction was specific, and she heard it. That might be enough, she said. What you were knew how to find things. That part doesn't expire. He looked at her. She was watching the road ahead. She said things like that the way she fixed fences, efficiently, without making a production of it, because the work needed doing, and she had the right tool, and she used it. He didn't say anything. He looked back at the road. They reached the outskirts of Guthrie in the late afternoon of the first day, stopping for the night at a small homestead off the main road where Cole knew the family, a widower named Granger, who kept a spare room for travelers and asked only for help with whatever the evening required. Ruth fixed a broken porch hinge before supper and washed the dishes after, and Granger watched her with the quiet approval of a man who has lived alone long enough to recognize competence when it walks through his door. After supper, when Granger had gone to his room, Ruth and Cole sat on the porch in the cooling dark and worked through what they knew. If the original statute is on record, Ruth said, and the county interpretation memo is on record, and those numbers don't match, that's the foundation. But foundation alone isn't enough to stop a court proceeding that's already been filed. She had her hands around a cup of water, elbows on her knees, working through it. We need someone who can testify to the discrepancy, someone with official standing, someone whose credentials a territorial judge can't dismiss. Haskell, Cole said. If he'll do it, she said. I'll ask him, Cole said. In the morning, before the records office opens. She looked at him sideways. You sure he'll see you? No, Cole said honestly, but I'm going to his door regardless. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, There's something else. In Denver, after everything fell apart with the Prescott case, I started keeping my own records. Every irregularity I found before aldermen buried them. Dates, document numbers, discrepancies, the names of the notaries involved. She looked at the dark yard. I kept them because I knew one day they'd matter, and I didn't want to be standing in front of a judge with nothing but my word. A pause. I have those records at my ranch, in a locked box under the floorboard of the back room. Cole turned to look at her. You've been sitting on evidence for 3 years? He said. I've been waiting to be in a position where the evidence could do something besides get me ignored again, she said. Her voice was even and entirely without apology. In Denver, I had no standing, no ally, and a supervisor who was being paid to make problems disappear. Here I have a pattern that crosses 3 counties, a former Pinkerton investigator who understands how to build a case, a deputy who's been watching the same man for months, and a community of landowners who are ready to stand up together. She looked at him. The evidence matters more now than it did then. That's not hoarding it. That's knowing when it's useful. Cole was quiet for a moment. He thought about the Pinkerton methodology he'd spent 14 years learning. The principle that information was only as valuable as the moment you chose to use it. He'd seen agents burn good evidence by moving too early, before the surrounding structure was solid enough to hold it. She hadn't been waiting out of passivity. She'd been waiting out of strategy. How detailed are those records? He said. Detailed enough that Haskell will recognize what they are, she said. Document numbers correlate to specific filings. Notary seal numbers. Date discrepancies cross-referenced to the original statutes. She paused. I can ride back for them after Guthrie if we need them. We'll need them, Cole said. Send Nora a wire from town in the morning. Have her go to your ranch and get that box. Ruth looked at him. Something moved in her face, small but real. The expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy alone for a long time, and has just been offered help by someone who understood the exact weight of it. All right, she said. They reached the Territorial Court Records Office when it opened at 8 in the morning. Ruth went directly to the clerk, a woman of about 50 with reading glasses on a chin, and the particular efficiency of someone who had been managing men's inability to find things for 3 decades. "I need the original text of the Oklahoma Territorial Tax Provision of 1882, subsection 4, Ruth said, "and any county interpretation memos filed against it through the Land Commissioner's office in the Driftwood Creek District in the past 6 months." The clerk looked at her over the glasses. "You have standing to request those records?" "I'm a party to a proceeding that cites that provision," Ruth said. "My name is Ruth Calloway. I ranch in the Driftwood Creek District. I received a notice last week." She set Walter Bone's notice on the counter. "This document references the provision. I'm entitled to review the underlying statute." The clerk looked at the notice. She looked at Ruth. She said, "Give me 20 minutes." Cole stood beside the door and watched the room while they waited. The records office had 2 other visitors, a young attorney reviewing deed filings at the far table, and an older man in a gray vest who had come in 5 minutes after them and was now at the counter requesting something in a low voice that Cole couldn't hear clearly. He could hear enough. He moved to Ruth's side. He said, very quietly, "The man in the gray vest. He asked for the same provision." Ruth didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the door the clerk had gone through. "Voss's attorney," she said. Not a question. "Or Sutton's," Cole said. "Either way, the same request." "Then we're already here," she said. "He's not ahead of us." The clerk came back with 2 documents. She set them on the counter. Ruth took the original statute first. She read the relevant subsection with the focused speed of someone reading for a specific number. She found it. Cole watched her face. She looked up. Her eyes were very still. 40 bushels equivalent per acre, she said quietly. "That's what the statute says." "And the notice says 14, Cole said. "And the notice says 14, she said. She took the county interpretation memo next. She read it. She read the productivity threshold on page 3. She set it on the counter very carefully. 14, she said. Signed by County Land Commissioner Sutton. Filed 43 days ago. She looked at Cole. On her face was the specific expression of someone who has just watched a thing they suspected become a thing they can prove. "I need a certified copy of both documents," she told the clerk. "Official court seal." "That'll take an hour," the clerk said. "I'll wait," Ruth said. They found Haskell at the house on Perkins Street that Cole remembered from 5 years ago. A well-kept place with a kitchen garden along the south wall, and a man sitting on the front steps reading a newspaper with the ease of someone who had earned his mornings. Haskell looked up when he heard the gate. He looked at Cole for a long moment, with the measuring stillness of a man reviewing a considerable amount of history. "Cole Maddox," he said. "Mr. Haskell," Cole said. "I need to ask you something." Haskell looked at Ruth. He looked back at Cole. "You'd better come in," he said. Cole told him everything. He told it straight and in order, without minimizing or editorializing, the way Haskell had always insisted information be delivered. Facts first, interpretation after. He told him about the notices, about the productivity threshold discrepancy, about Sutton's memo, about Voss and Denver, and the 3-year pattern Ruth had documented. Haskell listened without interrupting. He had the same quality Ruth had. Genuine absorption, not waiting for his turn. When Cole finished, Haskell said, "Theodore Marsh." He set down the newspaper. "I had a case in '84 that crossed his path. Filed under a different name then, too. A company called Western Meridian Land Holdings." He looked at Ruth. You found the notary discrepancy in Denver. I did, Ruth said. And I have the documented records of every irregularity I found in that office over 3 years, cross-referenced to specific filings. They're being retrieved from my property now. Haskell looked at her for a long moment. He had the focused, precise attention of a man who has spent a career deciding whether people were telling him the full truth, and had developed a considerable ability to determine when they were. A falsified county interpretation memo, signed by a sitting land commissioner, he said slowly, combined with a prior pattern of fraudulent notary certifications across multiple territories, combined with concurrent notices filed against multiple properties in the same district. That is not a civil land dispute. He looked at Cole. That is a federal fraud case. I know, Cole said. The territorial court in Driftwood Creek has jurisdiction for the immediate property proceedings, Haskell said. But if we can establish the federal pattern, the cross-territorial fraud, the falsified official documents, that pulls Voss into federal jurisdiction. He paused. He has never had to operate in federal jurisdiction before. Every time someone got close, the case stayed local, and local can be managed. He looked at Cole steadily. You understand what I'm saying? I understand, Cole said. Will you come to Driftwood Creek? Haskell stood up. He was a man of about 65, who moved like someone who had never fully retired from the work. Upright, deliberate, purposeful. I've been waiting for someone to bring me enough to act on, he said. Your woman here seems to have spent 3 years making sure that day would come. He looked at Ruth. The records you kept, how complete are they? Complete enough, Ruth said. It was exactly what she'd said to Cole the night before, with the same particular confidence of a person who knows the precise weight of what they're carrying. I've been careful for 3 years. I wasn't going to be careful and careless at the same time. Something moved in Haskell's face. Recognition and something close to relief. When do we ride? He said. Tomorrow morning, Cole said. Early. Haskell nodded. He went inside to prepare his documentation. Cole stood at the gate and looked at Ruth, and she was looking at the house with that focused, forward expression she wore when the shape of something had clarified enough to move toward it. He said, "Your woman," Cole said. She turned and looked at him with one eyebrow raised slightly. I noticed, she said. I didn't correct him, Cole said. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not the small, controlled shifts he'd been watching all week, but something more open, more direct, more honest than she usually allowed in the space between a statement and a response. No, she said quietly. You didn't. She turned back toward the main road. We should send Nora that wire before the telegraph office closes, she said. And I want to look at the certified copies again tonight. Make sure we haven't missed anything. He followed her. He walked beside her through the Guthrie afternoon, with the full weight of what was coming sitting ahead of them on the road back to Driftwood Creek. And somewhere in the space between the courthouse and the telegraph office, Ruth Calloway reached up and adjusted her hat with the brisk, subtle gesture of a woman who has been preparing for a particular fight for 3 years, and has just acquired the last thing she needed to walk into it. Cole matched her pace. He did not think about stopping. They rode back into Driftwood Creek on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and knew before they reached the main street that something had moved while they were gone. It was in the quality of the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a small town in the working hours of a Wednesday afternoon, but the specific, compressed stillness of a place where people have been talking hard all morning and have just stopped. The way a room goes quiet when the person being discussed walks through the door. Cole felt it the moment they turned onto the main road, and Ruth felt it a half-second after him. He could tell by the way her shoulders settled, not tensing, but gathering, the way a person draws themselves together when they understand that the next hour is going to require everything they have. Nora Sheehan was waiting at the south end of the street. She had Ruth's locked box under her arm, and her hat pulled straight, and the expression of a woman who has been managing a deteriorating situation alone for 2 days, and is very glad to see reinforcements. "He moved the court hearing," Nora said, before either of them had fully dismounted. "Filed for an emergency proceeding yesterday morning. Judge comes in from the district seat tomorrow at 7. Ruth was off her horse. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Nora said. "And that's not all." She looked between them. "He served 3 more notices yesterday afternoon. Pete Dawson on the North Road. Clara Whitfield, Tom's wife, separate deed in her name. And the Methodist Church on Elm Street." She paused. "The church, Ruth." Ruth went very still. "The church has stood on that land for 14 years, Cole said. And according to Sutton's productivity assessment, a church building on half an acre qualifies as underutilized land under subsection 4 because it doesn't produce a measurable agricultural yield." Nora's voice was level, but the level was costing her something. "Reverend Marsh came to the sheriff's office this morning. Sheriff Bard told him it was a civil matter, and he should consult a lawyer." "Bard," Cole said, "has had a very comfortable relationship with the land commissioner's office since Sutton was appointed," Nora said. "Yes." Cole looked at Ruth. She was already opening the locked box, her fingers moving through the contents with practiced speed, checking, confirming, making sure what she'd sent Nora for was intact and complete. He watched her hands move through the papers and felt the particular quiet of a man watching someone do exactly the thing they were made to do. Except the word "made" was wrong, because nobody had handed Ruth Calloway these skills as a gift. She had built them herself, out of necessity and precision and 3 years of careful, solitary preparation. And standing here in the dust of the Driftwood Creek Main Street, watching her confirm her evidence, Cole understood for the first time the full weight of what she had been carrying alone and what it had cost her to carry it. "It's all here," she said. She closed the box. She looked at Nora. "Where is Haskell?" "The hotel on the north end," Nora said. "He arrived an hour ago. He's been reviewing his documentation in his room." A pause. "He also sent a wire to the Federal Land Office in Kansas City this morning, from Guthrie, before you left." Cole looked at her. "He wired them before we even asked him to come?" "He said he'd been waiting to have enough to send," Nora said. "He had enough." Something settled in Cole's chest. Not relief, exactly. Relief was too simple for what this was. It was more like the feeling of a structure taking its final shape. The moment when the load-bearing elements lock into place and the thing you've been building becomes something that can hold weight. "We need everyone tonight," Ruth said. "Walter, May Greer, Tom Whitfield, Pete Dawson, Clara Whitfield, Reverend Marsh. Everyone who received a notice." She looked at Nora. "Your kitchen is the safest place. Not the hotel, not anyone's business. Private." Nora nodded. "I'll have them there by 8. They gathered at 8 o'clock in Nora Sheehan's small kitchen behind the deputy's office. 8 people around a table built for 4, standing along the walls, sitting on the counter, filling the room with the compressed, careful energy of people who understand that the conversation they're about to have is going to determine something real. Walter Bones stood near the door with his arms crossed and his face holding the particular stillness that Ruth was coming to recognize as his version of full attention. May Greer, 61 years old and built like someone who had spent 6 decades refusing to be moved, sat at the center of the table, with her notice in her hands and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Tom Whitfield sat beside his wife Clara and held her hand in a way that was so straightforward and uncalculated that it landed in the room like a small, quiet declaration. Pete Dawson was the youngest of them, maybe 35, with the uncertain energy of someone who has not yet been through enough to know what he can survive. And Ruth noticed him immediately and made sure to look at him directly when she spoke, because he needed to see steadiness in someone's face before he could find it in his own. Reverend Marsh stood beside the window. He was a thin man of about 60, with the specific compressed grief of someone whose faith has not been shaken, but whose trust in the surrounding human apparatus of it has taken a considerable blow. He had not expected to be standing in a deputy's kitchen discussing fraudulent government documents on a Wednesday night, and his expression held the particular bewildered dignity of a man trying to locate the correct moral framework for a situation his experience had not prepared him for. Ruth put the certified copies from Guthrie on the table. She put her own documented records beside them. She put Walter's notice, and May's notice, and Clara Whitfield's notice in a row, and she let everyone look at them for a moment before she said anything. Because she had learned in the land office that people understand documents better when they've had a moment to see the physical reality of them before anyone starts explaining. Then she explained. She did it the way Haskell had done it years ago, in the one training session she'd attended before Alderman pulled her out. Clearly, in sequence, without condescension, and without rushing. The original statute, the subsection 4 threshold, the number that should have been 40, the number in Sutton's memo that was 14, the certified court copies that proved both numbers existed in the official record simultaneously, which meant one of them was fraudulent. And given that the memo was signed by a land commissioner who had been appointed 6 months ago with letters of recommendation from a street, Lewis Land Development Company, the direction of the fraud was not difficult to determine. She told them about Denver. She told them about Theodore Marsh. She used the name deliberately and watched Reverend Marsh's face register the coincidence with a kind of grim, biblical irony. She could tell he was filing away for a future sermon. She told them about the Prescott family. She told them about the 3 years of record she'd kept. Every discrepancy, every cross-county notary irregularity, every document number that didn't match what it claimed to match. She told them about Haskell and what federal jurisdiction meant. What it meant specifically was that Voss had managed every prior case by keeping it local, by managing judges and commissioners and sheriffs, and that a federal case pulled the proceeding out of the arena he'd learned to control and into one where his tools didn't work the same way. When she finished, the room was very quiet. May Greer looked at the certified copies on the table for a long moment. Then she said, "My husband built that land up from nothing over 30 years. He died on it. I have been running it for 8 years since, and no man with a leather satchel and a falsified number is taking it while I have breath in my body." She looked at Ruth steadily over the reading glasses. "Tell me what you need from me in that courtroom." "Your notice and your testimony that you received it," Ruth said. "That's all. Haskell does the technical work. Your job is to stand up and be counted." "That I can do," May said, as if the question had been almost insultingly simple. Tom Whitfield said, "The church." He looked at Reverend Marsh. "They included the church." "They did," Ruth said. "That was a mistake," Tom said. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "You go after farms and ranches, people get afraid and feel alone. You go after the church, you tell the whole community they're next." He looked around the room. "There isn't a family in this county that doesn't have someone who has sat in that building. He just told every one of them, this is about them." Ruth looked at him. "That's exactly right," she said, "and that's why I need as many people in that courtroom tomorrow morning as are willing to come." "I'll be there," Reverend Marsh said. His voice had found its ground again. "And I will personally speak to every family in this congregation before 7 o'clock tomorrow morning." Cole had been standing near the door through all of this, watching the room the way he'd been trained to watch rooms. Not the surface of things, but the structure underneath. The way information was being received and processed, where the weight of it was landing. Who was hesitating and who was certain. What he saw in this room was not what he'd expected. He'd expected fear wearing the mask of resolve. He'd seen that before, in labor meetings in Chicago, in tenant gatherings in Missouri. People who showed up brave and went home afraid, and by morning had talked themselves out of whatever they'd agreed to the night before. This room was different. This was the specific, durable quality of people who had already been alone with their fear for days and had made their decision in private before they walked through the door. They hadn't come to be convinced. They'd come to find out what to do with the conviction they'd already reached. He thought about James Decker's meetings in the Kansas City stockyards. The same quality, the same rooms. And he had walked into those rooms pretending to be something he wasn't, and used every true thing those people gave him against them. He was not going to let that happen here. After the others had gone, when it was just Ruth and Cole and Nora in the kitchen with a lamp burning low, Nora said, "There's something you need to know about tomorrow." She looked at Cole. "Voss met with Sheriff Bard this evening. I saw them go into Bard's office through the back entrance at 7 o'clock. They were in there for 40 minutes. Cole said, "Bard controls who has standing in the courtroom." "He controls who is admitted, and in what order," Nora said. "A friendly sheriff can delay Haskell's entry, challenge his credentials, create procedural complications that eat up the court's time before the evidence is properly entered." She paused. "I can't override Bard. My authority is limited. But I can be in that courtroom from the moment the doors open, and I can log everything that happens on official record, which means any interference becomes documented interference." Ruth looked at her. "You've been building this record since Sutton was appointed," she said. "Since the week before he was appointed," Nora said. "The letter recommending him came across Bard's desk, and Bard was very careful to leave it where I could see it, which was his way of telling me that things were changing, and I should decide whether I was going to make trouble about it." She looked at both of them steadily. "I decided." Cole said, "Has Voss approached you directly?" Nora's expression was very specific. 3 weeks ago, she said. "He came into the office while Bard was out, and he sat in the chair across from my desk, and he told me he admired the work I was doing, that it was remarkable for a woman in my position, and that he hoped I understood the importance of maintaining good relationships with the community's leading figures." She paused. "He picked up my pen from my desk while he was talking, held it, turned it over, set it back down." "He put it back in the wrong place," Cole said. Nora looked at him. "Yes," she said. "How did you know?" "He did the same thing to Walter," Ruth said. "It's deliberate. He touches things to tell you he's comfortable in your space." She paused. "What did you say to him?" "I said, 'Thank you for stopping by, Senator. I'll make sure your visit is logged in the official record, along with the time and date.'" Nora looked at the table. "He left very quickly after that." Ruth almost smiled. It was the same almost smile Cole had seen twice before. Small, involuntary, the expression of someone who has been managing a very difficult situation alone for a long time and has just encountered evidence that they are not, in fact, alone. They went over the morning plan 3 times. Haskell would arrive at the courthouse at 6:30, before proceedings officially opened, and file a formal motion requesting that the federal pattern evidence be entered before any individual property rulings. Ruth had written the motion herself on the road back from Guthrie, in her neat, precise hand, on the back of 3 pages of Granger's brown paper, because she hadn't had anything better, and Haskell had read it and said, without a trace of flattery, that it was more technically precise than most things his junior colleagues had produced. Nora would be inside from the moment the doors opened with her official log. The landowners would arrive together, as a group, because there was a particular message in the physical fact of people choosing to stand in the same place at the same time. It was almost 11 when Cole and Ruth walked back through the quiet dark toward their horses. They had not discussed sleeping arrangements. They had both been too occupied with everything else to arrive at the question directly, and it had been sitting in the background of the evening like something that would need addressing eventually, but hadn't yet demanded it. Cole said, "You can take the bedroom." Ruth said, "I'll take the barn." He stopped. She stopped. "Ruth," he said. "Cole," she said. They looked at each other in the dark of the Driftwood Creek Main Street, with the lamplight from the hotel window falling across the distance between them, and everything that had happened in the past 4 days sitting in the air like weather. "You don't have to sleep in the barn," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm choosing to, for the same reason I've been choosing to." She held his gaze. "Because some lines are worth holding until you're sure you're not holding them out of habit." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what she'd said on the porch at Granger's place, that she'd been waiting 3 years to be in a position to do something, that she was considerably better than all right. He thought about the locked box under the floorboard and what it meant to carry something that carefully for that long. He thought about all the ways Ruth Calloway had organized her life around the assumption that she would be doing everything alone, and how that assumption was not a wound, but a competence, and how the difference between those two things mattered enormously. "All right," he said, "but I want you to know something." She waited. "When this is over," he said. He stopped, started again. "When tomorrow is done, and Haskell has said what he came to say, and the court has ruled, and Voss is looking at the shape of what we built against him, I want to ask you something. Not tonight. Tonight there's too much else." He held her gaze. "But I want you to know I'm going to ask." Ruth looked at him with a full, direct, unguarded version of the look he'd seen 3 times now, and counted carefully each time. "I'll be listening," she said. She went to the barn. He went inside and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and he did not sleep, and he did not try to, because some nights are not for sleeping, but for sitting with the full weight of what tomorrow requires, and making sure you are equal to it. He was thinking about James Decker. He was thinking about what it meant to walk into a room full of people who trusted you, and to deserve that trust this time. He was thinking about Ruth's 3 pages of evidence, and the 14 years of skill she'd built that were now, finally, in the right place at the right time, in the hands of people who were going to use them correctly. He was thinking about what Haskell had said in Guthrie. He has never had to operate in federal jurisdiction. Every time someone got close, the case stayed local. Tomorrow, it would not stay local. At 5:30 in the morning, Cole heard Ruth in the kitchen. He heard the fire start, heard the particular sequence of sounds he'd come to know. The coffee pot, the specific weight of her step on the floor, the sound of her opening the back door to check the morning. He lay in the dark and listened and thought, not for the first time, and with more certainty than before, that these sounds were the best sounds a house had made in the 3.5 years he'd been in it. He got up. She had coffee ready and 2 biscuits from the night before, warmed on the iron, and she handed him a cup without comment, and they drank in the early dark, with the full weight of the day already moving around them. "You ready?" he said. She looked at him across the rim of her cup. "I've been ready for 3 years," she said. He believed her entirely. They rode to the courthouse in the early gray light of an Oklahoma Territory morning, with the town waking around them and the particular hush of a place that knows something is about to happen and has not yet decided how to feel about it. The courthouse door was open. Haskell's motion was already on file. Nora Sheehan was inside with her log open and her pen in her hand. And at the far end of the main street, in the window of the hotel's best room, the lamp was burning in the gray pre-dawn, and the silhouette of a man with a leather satchel was visible for a moment before the curtain moved. Ruth. She put her hand on Cole's arm, not for steadiness, she didn't need steadiness, but because she wanted to, and she had decided in the small hours of the morning that there were certain things worth doing simply because you wanted to, and that wanting them was not a weakness, but a fact. "Let's go," she said. Cole put his hand over hers for one moment, then they walked through the door. The courtroom filled faster than anyone had predicted. By 6:45, 20 minutes before the proceeding was scheduled to open, every seat was taken, and people were standing along both walls. Cole counted them from his position near the door, not out of habit, though habit was part of it, but because he wanted to know the shape of what Ruth and Nora and Walter and all the others had built, just by telling the truth to the right people at the right time. Reverend Marsh had done exactly what he said he would do. The families were there. Not just the landowners who had received notices, but the people connected to them. The people who understood that a church on Elm Street, with 14 years of baptisms and funerals and ordinary Sundays in it, was not an abstract legal target, but a place where their lives had been witnessed. Harlan Voss came in at 6:50 with his attorney and two men, who positioned themselves at angles to each other near the back wall. Voss looked exactly as Ruth had described him the first morning. Composed, well-dressed, carrying the patient certainty of a man who has walked into many rooms and never yet walked out of one worse than he'd entered it. He looked at the crowd with a brief, professional assessment, and Cole watched his face register the number of people and absorb it without visible reaction. And in that specific absence of reaction, Cole read the thing he'd been trained to read. The micro-adjustment of a man who has encountered something he didn't fully anticipate and is already recalculating. Voss looked across the room and found Cole. Cole looked back at him and did not look away. Voss moved to his table. Haskell was already at the front of the room, his document case open, his materials organized with the neat precision of someone who had spent 3 decades presenting evidence in official proceedings and had learned that physical order communicates authority before a single word is spoken. He looked up when Cole and Ruth came in and gave them a single nod that was entirely sufficient. Ruth went to the landowner's side of the room. Cole watched her move through the crowd, the quiet word to May Greer, the hand briefly on Tom Whitfield's arm. The moment she stopped beside Walter Bone and said something low that made Walter's expression shift from its characteristic stillness into something warmer and more open. She was not performing confidence. She was distributing it, the way someone who has more than enough of something shares it with the people who need it before the work begins. Judge Harmon arrived at 7 o'clock precisely. He was a man of about 55, compact and deliberate, with the no-ceremony quality of a circuit judge who covers too much territory to invest in theatrical entrances. He looked at the packed room, looked at the motion Haskell had filed, looked at the 2 tables of counsel, and sat down. "I have reviewed the motion filed this morning by Mr. Franklin Haskell, former federal land examiner," he said, without preamble. "I have also been in contact this morning with the Federal Land Office in Kansas City, which received a preliminary inquiry from Mr. Haskell yesterday, and has responded with a request that this proceeding be conducted with full evidentiary transparency." He looked at Voss's attorney, a smooth, confident man named Calder, who had been arranging his papers with the ease of someone who expected to win on procedural grounds before noon. "Mr. Calder, the motion to enter the federal pattern evidence before individual property rulings is granted. You will have full opportunity to cross-examine. We begin with the evidence." Calder was on his feet. "Your Honor, the motion is an attempt to introduce collateral material into what is a straightforward territorial tax proceeding. My client's notices were filed under clearly established provincial authority and—" "Mr. Calder, Judge Harmon said, with the specific flatness of a man who has heard this sentence before and has no patience for the rest of it. "Sit down." Calder sat. Haskell testified for 50 minutes. He was not dramatic. He did not need to be. He had the particular devastating quality of a witness who is so thoroughly factual that the facts do all the dramatic work themselves. And the facts in this case were extraordinary in the plain, terrible way that genuine fraud is always extraordinary once it's fully visible. He laid out the original statute. He laid out the subsection 4 threshold, 40 bushels equivalent per acre, established in 1882 and unchanged. He produced the certified copy from the Guthrie Territorial Court. He produced Sutton's county interpretation memo with its number of 14. He showed them side by side. He then produced Ruth's records. Cole watched the room when Haskell put those 3 years of careful documentation on the table. He watched the landowners' faces, the moment of comprehension, the specific kind of anger that comes not from surprise, but from confirmation, when something you suspected turns out to be exactly as deliberate and calculated as you feared. May Greer's jaw went tight. Tom Whitfield looked at Clara, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that was wordless and complete. Walter Bone did not change expression, but his hands, which had been resting open on his knees, closed slowly into loose fists and then opened again. Haskell walked Judge Harmon through the cross-territorial pattern. The Denver case. The Prescott family. The specific notary irregularity Ruth had identified 3 years ago in the land office, now documented in her own hand with the cross-referenced filing numbers. He showed Harmon a case from the New Mexico Territory in 1885. Different method, same operational signature. Simultaneous notices, water access targeting, friendly commissioner, and always a man who was polite and well-dressed and made you feel like whatever was happening to you was reasonable. In each case, Haskell said, and his voice was even and unhurried, and filled the courtroom without effort. The proceeding was contained within local jurisdiction. In each case, the outcome was determined before the evidence was properly examined. In the Denver case, a land office clerk identified the notary discrepancy and brought it to her supervisor. The supervisor suppressed the finding. The Prescott family vacated their property. He paused. That clerk is in this courtroom today. She has been keeping the documented record of those findings for 3 years. That record is now before this court. Judge Harmon looked up from the documents. He looked at Ruth. Every person in the courtroom looked at Ruth. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded on the table, and she looked back at the judge without apology and without performance. Just the flat, clear truth of a woman who has been carrying the right information in the wrong place for 3 years and has finally gotten it to the right room. Calder cross-examined Haskell for 20 minutes and achieved nothing. There is nothing to do with a numerical discrepancy in a signed official document, except acknowledge it exists. And every question Calder asked in attempting to undermine Haskell's methodology only drew Judge Harmon's attention back to the certified copies and their 2 irreconcilable numbers. When Haskell stepped down, Judge Harmon looked at the room for a long moment. Then he looked at Voss. "Senator Voss," he said, "do you wish to address the court?" Voss stood. Cole watched him with the total focused attention he'd used all week, and he saw the thing he'd been watching for. The first real evidence of what Voss looked like when the outcome had been taken out of his hands. It was not collapse. It was not panic. It was something more precise and in some ways more revealing. The specific quality of a man who has built his entire professional existence on controlling the conditions around him, and is standing in conditions he did not control, and knows it, and is deciding in real time whether to fight the current or find another way to swim. "Your Honor," Voss said, and his voice was still composed, still carrying the reasonable cadence that Ruth had warned Cole about on that first morning. "I have operated in good faith on the legal instruments provided through the proper channels of the County Land Commissioner's Office. If those instruments contain errors, whether intentional or administrative, I am as much a victim of those errors as the landowners before this court." The room was very still. Judge Harmon's voice was flat. "The instruments you describe as containing possible administrative errors were filed on notices you personally authorized, Senator. They bear your company's filing marks and your attorney's name. The land commissioner who signed the falsified interpretation memo was appointed with letters of recommendation from your land development company." A pause that landed in the room with the weight of a very large and very quiet stone. "I am not inclined to accept a good faith argument that requires this court to accept 3 simultaneous coincidences." Voss sat down. He sat down slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man who is not finished, but who understands that this particular room is no longer the arena. He looked across the space at Cole. Cole looked back at him, steady and unhurried, and what he put in his eyes was not triumph and not contempt, but something simpler and more durable. The specific clarity of a man who has decided what he stands for, and is standing there, and is not going to move. Voss looked away first. Judge Harmon looked at the packed courtroom. He looked at the documents before him. He looked at Nora Sheehan, who was in the 3rd row with her official log open and her pen moving steadily, documenting every moment of the proceeding with the quiet relentlessness of a woman who has understood from the beginning that the record was the weapon. "The notices filed against Bone, Greer, Whitfield, Dawson, and the First Methodist Church of Driftwood Creek are dismissed," he said, "on the basis of fraudulent county interpretation under a falsified productivity threshold." He set down the papers. "This court will forward its findings to the Federal Land Office in Kansas City and to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office. The County Land Commissioner's Office is hereby under review, pending investigation of the interpretation memo. I am recommending that a federal examiner be assigned to audit all notices filed under Sutton's authority in the past 6 months." He paused. "Court is adjourned." The room released. It released the way rooms release after something significant. Not all at once, not in a clean wave, but in the accumulated small moments of people turning to each other and finding faces that confirmed what they just heard was real. May Greer put both hands flat on the table in front of her and exhaled once, long and slow, and then straightened up and looked at Ruth with an expression that was not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The particular dignity of a woman whose judgment about her own land has just been officially confirmed. Tom Whitfield pulled Clara into his arms, and she let him. And that was everything that needed to be said about that. Pete Dawson, the youngest of them, put his face in his hands for a moment, and then looked up with the specific expression of a man who has just discovered he is stronger than he thought he was. Walter Bone walked to where Ruth was standing, and he stopped in front of her, and he said simply, "Thank you." He said it the way he did everything, without excess, with complete sincerity, the kind of thank you that has the full weight of the person behind it. Ruth looked at him steadily. 19 years, she said. That land is yours. It was always yours. Walter nodded once. He held out his hand and she shook it. And then he walked out into the morning to go back to his shop and his tools, and the ordinary miraculous fact of his continued presence on the ground his family had worked. Haskell found Cole near the door. He shook his hand with both of his and said, "The federal case will take time. Months, probably. Voss has lawyers, and he'll use them. He held Cole's gaze. But we have the record now. A federal examiner on the audit, the territorial prosecutor's referral, and 3 territories worth of documented pattern. He has never faced that combination before. Will it hold? Cole said. It will hold, Haskell said, with the specific confidence of a man who does not make assurances he can't support. The Denver case, the Prescott family, the examination of the cross-territorial pattern will include that proceeding. There's a pathway there for a review of that ruling. He paused. It won't be fast, but it's open. Cole thought about Ruth sitting across from him in his kitchen 4 days ago, saying, "Possible is more than you had before." He thought about how much she had understood about the difference between a closed door and an open one, and how long she'd been holding one open with both hands, waiting for the room on the other side to be ready. "Tell her yourself," Cole said. Haskell moved through the thinning crowd toward Ruth, and Cole stepped back and watched him reach her. Watched her listen. Watched the moment when she understood what he was telling her about Denver and the Prescott case, and the pathway that had just opened. He watched her face in that moment with the full attention of a man who has learned over 4 days that Ruth Calloway's face, when she allows it to be fully visible, is the most honest thing in any room she's in. What he saw was not the relief he'd expected. It was something more interior and more complex. A specific kind of reckoning. The expression of someone who has been bracing against a particular wall for so long that when the wall moves, the first thing you feel is not freedom, but the strange work of learning to stand without the pressure. She pressed her hand flat against her chest for just a moment, a gesture so private he almost looked away. He didn't look away. When Haskell moved on, Cole walked to her. She was standing near the window with the morning light coming in at an angle, and her hat in her hands. And she looked at him when he came to stand beside her, with the full, open, unguarded look. The 4th time he'd counted it, and the most complete version yet. "He said Denver," she said. "I know," Cole said. "It could take a year," she said. "I know that too," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Driftwood Creek was going about the business of a morning that had just changed shape. People were moving on the street, talking in groups, that specific post-significant event energy of a community that has discovered something about its own capacity and is not entirely sure yet what to do with the discovery. "I need to go to Denver," Ruth said. "Not now, but soon. I need to find Esther Prescott. She needs to know that her case is open again, that someone is still fighting it." She paused. "She needs to know she wasn't forgotten." Cole looked at her. He thought about the things a person carries alone for 3 years, out of the conviction that carrying them carefully is the only way to make them matter. He thought about Esther Prescott loading a wagon on a day 3 years ago, while a land office clerk in a building 3 blocks away knew exactly what had happened and could not stop it. He thought about what it meant to carry that, and how Ruth Calloway had turned it into 3 years of careful documentation and a locked box under a floorboard, and the kind of preparation that waits for the right moment and does not waste itself on the wrong one. "You said you had something to ask me," Ruth said. "After." He looked at her. It was after. There was no more suitable after than this. Standing in the morning light of a courtroom that had just ruled in favor of the right people, with everything they'd built over 4 days still warm and solid around them. "Stay," he said. It was a single word, and he meant it to be exactly that. Not a speech, not a declaration of things she already knew. Just the plain, direct request of a man who has been alone in a house for 3.5 years, and has spent the last 4 days understanding the specific difference between existing in a place and living in it. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. She held the look the way she held everything, fully, without hedging. "My wheel's still cracked," she said. "I know," he said, "and my horse needs another day of rest before he's sound enough for the road back," she said. "I know that too," he said. "And the south pasture," she said, and her voice was quieter now. The composed precision she wore like armor, softening in the way it only did when she'd decided something. "You said it could hold 30 head with the right grass management." "It could," he said. "I'd want to see the water rotation plan before I committed to a number," she said. "That's fair," he said. She looked at him with the full, direct warmth of a woman who has been managing alone for 4 years and has just decided, with both eyes open and full knowledge of the cost of the alternative, that she is done managing alone. "Then I'll stay," she said. They walked out of the courthouse together into the Driftwood Creek morning, and the town moved around them with the particular ease of a place that has just remembered something important about itself, that it is made of people who, when it matters, choose to stand in the same place at the same time and hold. Nora Sheehan was on the front steps, her log closed, her hat straight, watching the street with the steady attention of a deputy who has learned to know the difference between a morning that is over and a morning that is just beginning. She looked at Cole and Ruth as they came out, and she did not say anything. But the expression on her face said everything that needed saying about a woman who has spent months watching a situation and has just seen it resolve in the direction she worked for. Walter Bone was already back at his shop. Through the open door, Cole could hear the ring of metal on metal, the steady, purposeful sound of a man doing his work in his own space, on his own ground, on another ordinary, extraordinary morning. May Greer was talking to Clara Whitfield on the far side of the street, and whatever she was saying had Clara's hand over her mouth and her eyes bright, and that was enough. Cole looked at Ruth beside him. She was looking at the street with a particular expression, the look of someone taking a full inventory of something they intend to keep. He recognized it because he'd been wearing it since the morning she'd handed him a list of everything wrong with his ranch, and told him there was a difference between what was wrong and what needed doing. She turned and looked at him. "Your back fence on the north section," she said. "The post by the creek bend needs resetting before the ground freezes." "I know," he said. "And the apple trees," she said. "You said you haven't walked up there in 3 years." "I said I'd take you," he said. "Today," she said, not a question. "Today," he said. They rode home through the flat Oklahoma morning, with the full weight of the week settling into something quieter and more permanent. And the ranch came into view on the low rise, with the new shingles bright on the south barn wall, and the winter squash visible in the garden plot, and the east fence line running straight and clean the way Ruth had left it 5 days ago, before any of this had started. She had walked into his unlocked kitchen with a cracked wagon wheel and a lame horse and 3 years of evidence in a locked box. And she had cooked a meal and fixed a fence, and she had changed everything. Not by arriving with something to give him, but by arriving with something to do, and doing it, and trusting that the doing was the thing that mattered. He unsaddled both horses while she went to check the garden. He could hear her moving through the rows, the small sounds of a person checking on something they planted and intend to see through. When he came out of the barn, she was standing at the edge of the plot, with her hand shading her eyes against the mid-morning sun, looking north toward the creek. "The trees are up there," he said. "I know," she said. They walked north together through the dry grass of the property he'd been letting go for 3.5 years, and the Oklahoma sky was enormous and indifferent above them, the way it always was. And the creek sound reached them before the trees came into view. The low, steady voice of water that had been running this particular course, regardless of whether anyone was paying attention to it. because water does not wait for people to be ready. The apple trees were there, 4 of them, in a rough line along the creek bank, unpruned and a little wild from 3 years without tending, but alive, deeply, stubbornly, entirely alive. Their roots running down to the water the way things that are determined to last always find the thing they need. Ruth stood in front of them for a long moment without speaking. Cole stood beside her and let the silence be what it was. "They need pruning," she said. "Yes," he said. "And the water rotation from the creek could be better managed on this north section," she said. "If you cut a proper channel, you could bring consistent irrigation to the garden and still keep the trees watered through a dry summer." "Show me what you're thinking," he said. She showed him. They walked the creek bank together, and she talked about water and soil and the specific stubbornness of apple trees that have been growing without anyone watching and have developed their own relationship with the ground beneath them. And he listened the way he had learned to listen to her, fully, without waiting for his turn, because what she said was always worth the full attention. When she finished, she looked at him. "You're going to be all right," she said. It was not a question, and it was not reassurance. It was the same flat, clear quality she used for true things, the same voice she'd used to say that Voss had made a mistake going after the church, the same voice she'd used to say 40 when the document said 14. The voice of someone naming what is simply, accurately, factually the case. Cole looked at the apple trees his wife had planted, and the woman standing beside them, who had walked into his kitchen 5 days ago with nothing but the truth in her hands, and changed everything about what the word home meant inside him. "Yes," he said, "I am." The creek ran on. The trees held their roots in the good ground along the bank. And in the kitchen of the Maddox Ranch, on the table where a gun had been set down 5 days ago and never picked back up, the lamp would burn that night for 2 people who had found each other not in spite of everything they'd lost, but because of everything they'd refused to stop carrying. And that, in the end, is the only kind of love that lasts.